You're a wicked and selfish man. My daughter told me when she realized I had donated my house to an orphanage in her name. I was actually planning to surprise her with a new house. But when I overheard her telling her husband that she had a way of taking my house away from me, I just needed to show her I was old but still smart. I will tell you everything. First, if you enjoy these kinds of stories, support us by liking, sharing, and subscribing to this channel. Also, let's know how far our stories travel by telling us where you are watching us from. Now let's get into the details of the story. I've always been a man who believed that hard work was the most honest form of love. I built my career with my own two hands, pouring sweat and stubbornness into every beam, every nail, every cracked knuckle. I wasn't always perfect. God knows I could have been softer at times. But when it came to my daughter, I did what I thought was right. Her mother passed when she was 9. From then on, it was just me and her against the world. I packed lunches, braided hair with fingers better suited for a wrench, and stayed up nights teaching myself how to help with science projects I barely understood. When I saw her walk across that college graduation stage, I stood in the back and clapped the loudest. And now, years later, I thought I'd finally found the perfect way to give back one more time, to surprise her with a house of her own. Not a mansion, not some cold investment property, but a warm little 2-bedroom with a backyard and a cozy front porch. I envisioned her and her husband planting herbs along the fence, maybe a dog scratching at the back door. I pictured birthday dinners there, her hosting Thanksgiving one day, proudly telling guests, "My dad gave us this place." I thought it would be the perfect bow on the life I tried to give her. But no gift is perfect when the recipient doesn't value the giver. The day I heard her say it, I had just returned from the bank. The final documents were signed, and I had the title tucked safely in a folder, ready to be wrapped. I'd even picked out a decorative key plaque from a local artisan to make the moment more special. I had no intention of eavesdropping. I came in through the side door of her house. My daughter had given me a spare key years ago, said it was in case of emergencies. I guess betrayal qualifies. They didn't hear me come in. I paused when I heard her voice drifting down the hallway, that casual lilt she got when she thought she was being clever. "He's old," she said, laughing lightly. "I'll get the house soon anyway. Either way, it'll all be mine in a few years." Silence. Then her husband's low chuckle, the kind that confirmed he agreed but didn't want to say it out loud. My chest didn't hurt at first. It didn't even register right away. I just stood there, stuck between the kitchen and the hall, holding that folder like a fool. The woman I raised, the one I thought I'd protected, taught, and provided for, was counting down the years until I died so she could collect what she felt was hers. Not asked, not earned, claimed, like a piece of land waiting to be inherited. I stood there for a few minutes, pretending I needed to find something in the garage. My hands trembled, not with anger at first, but confusion. I wanted to believe I'd misunderstood her, that maybe it was a joke taken out of context, or maybe she was venting some frustration I hadn't noticed. But the more I stood there, the more I replayed her tone, her words, her ease. I knew what I'd heard, and I knew it wasn't the first time she'd thought it. The problem with being the one who always gives is that people start believing they're owed. They stop seeing the love in your actions and start seeing the utility. I was no longer her father. I was a stepping stone to her future, an ATM with a pulse, a house in waiting. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my recliner, lights off, and stared at the ceiling. I thought about all the times I'd sacrificed for her, turning down overtime so I could attend her school plays, selling my motorcycle to help her with rent after college, even dipping into my emergency savings to cover her wedding when her in-laws fell short. I did it all gladly. Never once asked for payback or recognition. Just respect. Just a little bit of decency. And now she was treating my life like a clock counting down to her payday. Around 4 a.m., I made up my mind. I took that folder from the drawer, slipped out the original deed, and replaced it with new papers I printed after an hour of calling around. I signed the donation over to a local nonprofit that housed orphaned teens, many of whom had aged out of foster care. I'd worked with the group years ago during a volunteer build. I knew they could use the space, and I knew they'd cherish it in a way my own blood clearly couldn't. I didn't tell her right away. I went about my week as if nothing had happened. Picked up groceries for myself. trimmed the bushes outside my condo, went fishing with Earl down by the lake. But something had shifted in me, a quiet detachment. I stopped checking my phone to see if she needed anything. I ignored the little voice in my head that used to say, "Call her just to check in." The silence was a kind of peace. A hard one, but peace nonetheless. Her birthday was coming up, and I knew what she was expecting. We'd always kept our celebrations simple. Dinner at her favorite Italian place, a gift she'd pretend to be surprised by, then coffee back at her place. This year, I followed the routine, but when it came time for the gift, I handed her the envelope without a word. Just slid it across the table between the tiramisu and the espresso. She opened it with the kind of eager reverence I used to find endearing. When she unfolded the paper and realized what it was, what I'd done, her face fell. Not in confusion, but in disbelief. She blinked, read it again, then looked up at me with wide eyes. "What is this?" she asked. Her voice trembled, not from joy, but from the sting of losing something she thought was hers. "It's a house donation certificate," I said, "under your name, to the St. Elmo's Home for Girls. I figured since you were already planning for the future, I'd make sure your name stood for something good now." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Her husband looked away, clearly uncomfortable. She finally found her voice, but it came out shrill, sharp. "You're a wicked old man," she spat. "You tricked me." I smiled then, not out of cruelty, but because I finally saw her clearly. "I didn't trick you," I said. "You showed me who you are. I just believed you." And that was the beginning of the end. It's a strange thing, walking through the wreckage of a relationship you once thought was unshakable. For days after that dinner, her words echoed through my head like wind in an empty hallway, sharp, cold, and unsettling. "You're a wicked old man." It wasn't just the insult that got to me. It was the conviction in her voice, the way she truly believed she was the victim in all of this. I kept trying to rewind time in my head, thinking if I had raised her differently, maybe she'd see things clearer. Maybe if I hadn't stepped in so often, hadn't bailed her out every time life knocked her down, she'd have more respect for what's earned versus what's given. But parenting doesn't come with a manual. It's just a series of decisions made on gut and love, hoping it adds up to someone good. And now, I wasn't sure who I'd raised. I knew who I wanted her to be, but who she turned into, that was someone else entirely. I kept thinking about the moment she opened that envelope. The disbelief, the betrayal in her eyes. Not because she'd lost something she'd worked for, but because she'd been denied something she felt entitled to. That was what stung the most. I remember her looking at the donation certificate like it was an eviction notice, as if giving that house to orphans was some kind of twisted punishment rather than a redirection of generosity. I had to ask myself, how did she get here? How did the little girl who once gave me handmade cards on Father's Day turn into a woman who laughed about inheriting my house while I was still alive? And what role did I play in that transformation? I didn't have all the answers. Hell, I barely had any. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to reward cruelty, not even from my own blood. The next morning, I got a call from her mother-in-law. Now, let me be clear, I never much cared for that woman. Always had a way of talking like she was just barely holding back judgment. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask what happened. She just launched right into it. "I heard what you did. You embarrassed her. Publicly. On her birthday." I let her talk. Let her paint me as the villain. When she paused long enough to breathe, I said, "Did she tell you what she said about me? That she was just waiting for me to die so she could get the house?" Silence. A beat. Then a soft, surprised, "Well, I'm sure she didn't mean it like that." I hung up. I wasn't going to argue with people who had already chosen their side. I'd done enough justifying in my life. Now, I was simply acting. And they could catch up or stay behind. I no longer cared. That afternoon, I went to the house, the one I'd donated. It still had the faint smell of fresh paint and cedar. A few of the kids were there already, moving boxes and folding blankets. One girl, maybe 17, stopped and looked at me. "You the guy who gave us this place?" she asked. I nodded. She smiled, not a forced smile, not one of those polite things people do out of obligation. This one was real. "Thanks," she said. "This is the first time I've had a room that's mine." And that was it. One sentence. But it undid every bitter word I'd heard that week. I stood there for a moment, taking it all in. The hum of activity, the laughter echoing from upstairs. These kids didn't see the house as a prize. They saw it as safety, as hope, as a place where they could start again. Funny how strangers can see more value in something than your own family ever did. That evening, I sat in my kitchen sipping a cup of tea, thinking about what came next. My phone buzzed 3 times, calls from her I didn't answer. Then a text. I can't believe you do this to your own daughter. No apology, no self-reflection, just accusation. I stared at that message for a long time. I thought about replying, about explaining myself. But then I remembered something I used to tell her when she was little and throwing a tantrum. You don't get to be mean and get your way. She used to pout, stomp her foot, slam her door. Eventually she'd come around. But now she just turned up the volume and expected the world to bend. I deleted the text. The following week, my sister called me. She's always been the voice of reason in the family, even when reason was in short supply. I heard what happened, she said softly. You all right? That was the first time someone asked me that. Not why'd you do it? Not what were you thinking? Just you all right? And I felt something catch in my throat. I didn't cry, but I damn near came close. I told her everything, word for word, what I heard, what I felt, what I did. She didn't interrupt, just listened. When I finished, she exhaled slowly. She needed this, she said. You didn't hurt her. You handed her a mirror. Whether she looks into it or not, that's on her. I didn't know how much I needed to hear that until I did. It didn't make the pain disappear, but it reminded me I wasn't crazy. That sometimes love looks like tough choices. Like letting someone fall so they finally learn to stand. I knew the storm wasn't over. I could feel it brewing. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of it. Because the truth was, I'd lived through worse. I'd survived loneliness, grief, financial ruin, and the aching silence of an empty house after my wife passed. I could survive this too. What I couldn't survive anymore was pretending things were fine when they weren't. My daughter had shown me something ugly. And maybe, just maybe, this was the first step in helping her see it too. If she ever wanted to come back from that, really come back, not just for a gift or a handout, I'd be here. But she'd have to walk that road herself. I wasn't paving it for her anymore. Her birthday dinner played out like a scene from a movie I never meant to direct. I had dressed in my best shirt, crisp and ironed, despite my hands trembling more than usual that day. I didn't tell anyone what was coming. Not her husband, not the waiter who greeted us with a polite smile and a wine list I barely glanced at. I sat there, watching her eyes dart to the little gift box I'd placed on the table. I knew what she thought it was. I could almost see the greed swelling quietly behind her mascaraed lashes. She thought she had won, that the house was hers after all, despite what she'd said, that I had caved the way I always did. There was a flicker of smugness in her smile when she raised her glass to toast, and I nearly walked out right then. But I stayed because the truth, when delivered properly, doesn't need a defense. It speaks for itself, and mine was sitting right inside that box. Wrapped in tissue and quiet retribution. We ordered. We made small talk. Her husband was oddly reserved, chewing slower than usual, barely meeting my eye. I think he suspected something. Maybe he'd sensed my distance the last few days, or maybe he was simply afraid I might bring up what I'd overheard. Either way, he didn't say much. She, on the other hand, chatted as if nothing had happened, bragging about a new furniture set she wanted to buy, how she was already planning the layout of the new place, just in case. I sipped my water and said nothing. Let her talk. Let her show me, again, exactly who she was. I thought about how often people tell you who they are, but we're too busy loving the idea of them to listen. That was my mistake. I had loved the idea of her. The daughter who would carry my values forward, who would remember what it cost to build something from nothing, who would pass that wisdom on. But that daughter didn't exist. And the one sitting across from me, she was about to find out just how much she'd misunderstood the man who raised her. When dessert came, I slid the box across the table with a soft smile. Happy birthday, I said. She opened it quickly, her fingers trembling slightly in anticipation. She pulled out the certificate, scanned it, then again, slower. Her smile faltered. What is this? She asked. Not confused, offended. It's a certificate of donation, I replied, voice steady. The house is now St. Elmo's transitional home for girls. In your name, of course. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. She looked around, as if expecting cameras, a joke, an explanation that would make everything make sense. You gave my house away? She said, her voice rising, tight with panic. You donated it? To some strangers? Her husband's eyes dropped to his plate. The waiter paused a few tables over, probably picking up on the shift in energy. I leaned back, folded my hands in my lap. It was never your house, I said calmly. It was a gift. But after what I heard you say, I realized you weren't ready for something like that. So I found people who were. The silence that followed was suffocating. She blinked, stunned, her hands trembling now for a different reason. You're a wicked old man, she whispered, loud enough for the nearby table to hear. How could you do this to your own daughter? Her voice cracked on the last word, a mixture of rage and disbelief. I nodded slowly. You're right, I said. It's wicked, isn't it? To expect your father to die just so you can have a bigger closet. To laugh about it like I'm already in the ground. Wicked indeed. Her face crumpled then, not from guilt, but from humiliation. She grabbed her purse, muttering something about how I had ruined everything. Her husband followed quickly behind, not saying a word. And I stayed, finished my coffee, and left a generous tip for the waiter who pretended not to notice the explosion at table 12. The days that followed were loud in all the ways that silence can be. She didn't call. Not right away. But the fallout came like a tidal wave. Her friends started reaching out, some with concern, some with thinly veiled curiosity. Is it true what she said? That you tricked her? My niece called, confused, wanting the full story. I told her the truth, exactly as it happened. No theatrics, no embellishment, just the facts. And slowly, the tide turned. Not completely. Some people still believed her version, that I'd set her up, that I'd wanted to embarrass her. But others, those who knew me, who remembered the years of sacrifice and quiet giving, saw it differently. They called it tough love. Necessary. Even overdue. I didn't care about public opinion. But it did make something clear. The truth has a way of cutting through noise, if you let it breathe. She eventually called. Left a voicemail, actually. I didn't answer. Her voice sounded broken, but not in the way someone sounds when they've had a reckoning. More like someone who's angry they didn't get away with it. I don't know what kind of twisted lesson this was supposed to be, she said. But congratulations, Dad. You've officially lost your daughter. I listened to the message twice, then deleted it. Because the truth is, I hadn't lost my daughter. I'd never truly had her. What I had was a version of her that I'd built in my head. The real her, the one who measured love in square footage and inheritance timelines. That was someone I didn't recognize anymore. And maybe that's the hardest part of growing older. Not just losing people to time, but realizing that some people were never who you thought they were to begin with. That weekend, I went back to the donated house. It was already filled with laughter. The walls, once silent and waiting, now echoed with the sound of footsteps and stories. One of the girls, a quiet one named Lila, had painted a mural on the back wall of the living room. It was a garden, bursting with color, stretching from one end of the wall to the other. We're calling it the Hope House now, one of the volunteers said. Because that's what it feels like. I nodded. My throat tightened, but I didn't cry. Not out loud, at least. I just stood there, watching strangers turn what was once my daughter's future into something far more beautiful than she ever would have made it. That night, I stood in front of the mirror brushing my teeth when I caught my reflection and just stared for a long time. There were more wrinkles than I remembered. My eyes looked tired, older. But behind them, there was clarity. I wasn't just a man who gave away a house. I was a man who drew a line, who said enough. And sometimes, that's what fatherhood looks like. Not soft, not yielding, but steady and unshakable, even when it breaks your heart. Family drama spreads faster than gasoline on dry leaves, and the spark that set mine ablaze was lit the second my daughter opened her mouth to the rest of them. It didn't take long before I started getting calls, not just from her, but from cousins I hadn't seen in years, uncles who'd never lifted a finger for me, and even a few family friends who thought they had a right to weigh in. Everyone suddenly had an opinion. You should have spoken to her first. She's young. She didn't mean it. That was cruel, even for you. And my personal favorite, you let your pride get in the way of doing what's right. Funny, isn't it? The way people rewrite your actions to make themselves feel better about not seeing the truth. Not one of them called to ask what she said. Not one asked why I made the choice I did. They all just assumed I woke up one day and decided to drop a grenade on my own child's birthday. Because heaven forbid anyone believe that the golden girl, the one they all cooed over at family reunions, might actually have darkness in her. That maybe, just maybe, she'd said something so cold, so callous, that even a father's love couldn't survive it. I spent most of that week ignoring my phone. I went fishing. I took long drives. I read the same paragraph of a book about 6 times before realizing I wasn't really reading at all. I was trying to outrun the noise in my head, but it kept finding me. I'd see her face in old photos around the house. Her gap-toothed grin at age 6, her prom night makeup clumsily applied, her graduation cap slightly askew because she'd never liked following instructions. And each time, I'd feel that tug, that ache, the one that said maybe you overreacted. But then I'd hear her voice again, clear as a bell in the back of my mind. He's old. I'll get the house soon anyway. That wasn't a mistake. That wasn't a slip of the tongue. That was who she was when she thought I wasn't listening. And I couldn't ignore that anymore. Not for her. Not for anyone. Things escalated the following Sunday at my cousin Ray's barbecue. I hadn't planned to go, but my sister insisted. You can't avoid everyone forever, she said. And if you don't show up, they'll just keep making up their own version of the story. So I went. Showed up with my potato salad and my quiet dignity, hoping maybe it would be a short evening. It wasn't. She was there, my daughter, standing by the grill like she hadn't spent the past week calling me a monster to anyone who'd listen. I saw her before she saw me. She was laughing, drink in hand, surrounded by a few of our cousins. The moment she noticed me, her smile vanished. The air got thick. Conversations around us paused. I walked past her without a word, headed straight for the cooler, grabbed a soda, and found a quiet spot in the shade. But peace wasn't going to be mine that day. Not with her building up the courage to make a scene. It happened about an hour in. I was sitting with my sister, talking about her garden, when my daughter marched over like a storm on 2 legs. So this is it, she said loudly enough for heads to turn. You're just going to pretend I don't exist now. I looked up, took a slow sip from my can, and didn't say a word. She kept going. You humiliated me in front of my husband. You gave away a house that was supposed to be mine. And now you're just out here playing the victim? I glanced around. Eyes were locked on us, some uncomfortable, some hungry for drama. I stood up then, not to match her energy, but because some things are better said eye to eye. You humiliated yourself, I said. I just handed you the mirror. That quieted her for a second. But pride has a way of filling silence with noise. It was a joke, she spat. I was venting. You're the one who turned it into a damn performance. I took a breath, steadying myself. You weren't venting, I said. You were revealing. And I heard you loud and clear. Her face flushed red, either from anger or embarrassment, maybe both. You think this makes you noble? She said. Giving away something that was meant for your family? For strangers? I looked at her then, really looked. And I realized I didn't know this woman anymore. I saw the makeup, the expensive purse, the carefully curated image of a woman who had everything together. But beneath it, entitlement, arrogance, and fear. Fear that without my money, my generosity, my presence, she might actually have to stand on her own. They're not strangers, I said. They're girls who've never had someone to believe in them, who never had a father to disappoint. That shut her up. For the first time, I saw something crack in her. But pride, again, rushed in to patch the leak. She turned on her heel and stormed off, muttering about how she hoped I enjoyed being alone. My sister didn't say anything for a long while, just sat beside me, watching the smoke curl up from the grill. Finally, she said, You did the right thing, you know. I didn't reply right away, just nodded slowly. Doesn't feel like it, I muttered. Right things rarely do, she said, especially when they cost you this much. I thought about that on the drive home, how doing the right thing had a weight to it. Not the kind that crushed you, but the kind that made you stronger in the breaking. I had spent so long carrying everyone else's burdens that I forgot how to carry my own decisions without second-guessing them. But now, With the fallout spread across family group chats and barbecue gossip circles, I finally felt something close to clarity. This wasn't about punishment. It wasn't about revenge. It was about drawing a line and saying, "This is where I stop being taken for granted." That night, I didn't sleep much. But for the first time, I didn't lie awake wondering if I'd gone too far. I knew I hadn't. I knew because I didn't feel anger anymore, just grief. Grief for the relationship I thought I had. Grief for the daughter I imagined she'd become. Grief for the version of myself that kept hoping love could fix what entitlement had broken. But beneath that grief, there was something else too. Something quieter. Resolve. And that was enough to get me through the night. The apology came wrapped in guilt and bitterness, like a gift you didn't ask for, but are expected to be grateful for anyway. She didn't call first. No, that would have been too humble, too vulnerable. Instead, she showed up at my door one Saturday morning unannounced, holding a bakery box and a look that told me this wasn't about making things right. It was about reclaiming control. I opened the door and stood there for a moment, not moving aside to let her in, just looking at her. She looked smaller somehow, not physically, but emotionally, like the weight of her pride had started to collapse inward. "Hi, Dad," she said, lifting the box slightly. "I brought those lemon bars you like." I nodded slowly but didn't smile. "Still sweet, even when they're sour," I said, stepping aside finally, not out of warmth, but because I wanted to hear what she came to say. She walked in like she didn't quite belong there, like even she wasn't sure of her place anymore. Set the box on the kitchen counter and looked around, like maybe she was expecting the same house she'd known all her life to feel different now. Maybe it did. Or maybe she had just changed enough that nothing familiar felt the same anymore. She cleared her throat, crossed her arms over her chest. "I wanted to talk," she said. I raised an eyebrow but didn't interrupt. She launched into it quickly, like ripping off a bandage. "I know what I said that day was messed up. I was venting. We'd had a stressful week, and I wasn't thinking. I didn't mean it how it sounded." I stayed silent, letting the words fall between us like dropped dishes. Hollow, clattering, easily breakable. "You didn't mean it how it sounded?" I finally said. "Then explain to me. How exactly did you mean it?" Her mouth opened, then closed again. She looked down at the counter, then back at me. "I don't know. I was just frustrated. I've been under a lot of pressure. Bills, work, everything piling up. And I guess I thought, eventually things would get easier. With you getting older and all, I assumed you'd want to help out while you still could." I laughed then, not loudly, not cruelly, just enough to let the disbelief out of my chest. "So what you meant was exactly what you said. You were counting on me dying to make your life easier." She winced, as if hearing it out loud was worse than having said it in the first place. "No, I didn't want you to die. I just—" She paused, shook her head. "You're twisting it." "No," I said, voice firmer now. "I'm finally hearing it for what it is. You weren't joking. You were planning. And that's what broke my heart." She sat down at the table, fingers tugging at the sleeves of her sweater, eyes flicking everywhere but toward mine. "I didn't think it would hit you like that. I didn't think you were even there. That's the problem," I said, sitting across from her. "You didn't think at all." Silence again. Tense, charged. Then she tried a different tactic, one I'd seen before. The victim act. Tears welled up in her eyes. "I've been struggling," she whispered. "We're barely keeping up with the mortgage." I didn't know how to ask for help without feeling like a failure. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the table. "You could have just asked. You could have said, 'Dad, I'm drowning. Can we talk?' But instead, you laughed about my death and counted your winnings like it was a lottery ticket." She sniffled, wiping under her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "Truly, I am." I believed her, partially. Not because she was convincing, but because there was a flicker of shame in her eyes that hadn't been there before. But shame is not the same as growth. You can be ashamed and still never change. I sat back and reached into a folder I'd tucked beside the fridge, pulled out a single sheet of paper and slid it across the table. She looked down at it, confused at first. Then her face shifted as she read it. It was a list of jobs, local postings I'd printed out from the community center's bulletin board. "What's this?" she asked. "It's a start," I said. "Work for yours." Her mouth opened again, but I held up a hand. "I gave you everything I had when you were growing up. Food, shelter, education, time. I gave you my energy, my resources, my heart. What I got in return was the realization that somewhere along the way, I raised someone who thought all of that came with an expiration date. That when I got old enough, it was your turn to collect. I won't feed that delusion anymore. She sat back, stunned. So that's it. You're cutting me off. No, I said. I'm cutting off the version of you that expects handouts wrapped in guilt and birthday cards. If you want to be in my life, you come in as an adult. As someone who understands respect doesn't come from blood, it comes from behavior. She stood up slowly, holding the job list in her hands like it was written in a language she didn't recognize. I didn't come here for money, she said, her voice small. Good, I said, because I don't owe you any. She looked at me for a long time. There was something flickering in her expression, anger, sadness, maybe even a little admiration, though she'd never admit it. Then she walked to the door, pausing just long enough to say, "You're a lot colder than I remember, Dad." I watched her go, the door clicking shut behind her with a finality I hadn't expected. I stood there for a moment, the silence of the house wrapping around me like a familiar coat. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel cruel. I just felt steady, like I had finally stopped chasing something that had long since slipped through my fingers. I love my daughter. I always would. But love without boundaries isn't love, it's servitude. And I'd done my time. The days that followed her visit were still, almost suspiciously so. I kept waiting for another voicemail, another dramatic drop-in, some kind of aftershock from the conversation that had shaken us both. But nothing came. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't announce peace, but leaves you wondering if the storm's eye is actually the end or just a pause. I went about my days in routine. Early walks, coffee with the same four guys down at the corner diner, and evenings spent watching old westerns that had more justice in half an hour than most people manage in a lifetime. I wasn't lonely. Not really. I was adjusting. And there's a difference. Loneliness is when you ache for someone's presence. Adjustment is when you finally stop hoping they'll show up and start finding comfort in their absence. I missed who I thought she was, not who she proved to be. And that distinction, hard as it was to accept, kept me grounded. The house I gave away was fully up and running now. I visited a few times a week, not to hover, just to help. I fixed a busted railing on the porch, tightened up a leaky faucet in the kitchen, and even built a custom bookshelf for the living room where the girls had started a small library. It gave me something to do, but more than that, it gave me a sense of purpose again. These kids, these young women. They weren't looking at me like a retirement fund. They weren't waiting for me to keel over and hand them a deed. They just appreciated that someone cared enough to show up. I got more respect from a 16-year-old girl with a chipped tooth and 2 garbage bags to her name than I ever did from my own daughter. And that's not something I say with pride. It's something I say with sorrow. And with clarity. One afternoon, as I was painting the trim on one of the bedroom windows, a girl named Tasha came out with 2 lemonades. "You always work like you've got something to prove," she said, handing me one. I chuckled. "Old habits," I replied. "Well," she said, sitting down beside me. "Whatever it is, thanks. I never had a dad who stuck around for anything." She looked off into the distance, chewing on her lip like she'd said too much. I didn't pry, just nodded and took a sip. "Some of us come into each other's lives late," I said. "Doesn't make it any less real." She smiled at that, soft, tentative, but real. And in that moment, I felt something click. Like maybe my role in the world wasn't to pass down houses to ungrateful heirs, but to build homes, spaces filled with dignity, safety, and the kind of love that didn't come with strings or expectations. Maybe the legacy I'd always imagined for myself didn't have to come through blood. Maybe it could come through choice. A week later, I ran into my daughter at the grocery store. Total accident. She was coming out as I was going in, and for a moment, we both just froze like deer in headlights. She looked thinner, maybe a little more tired, and she wasn't wearing her usual polished smile. I gave her a polite nod, the kind you give an old neighbor or a distant acquaintance. She hesitated, then stepped closer. "Hi," she said. I nodded again. "Hey." She glanced around, then back at me. "I got a job," she said, almost defensively. "At a daycare. It's not much, but it's something." I raised an eyebrow, surprised. Good, I said. That's good to hear. She shifted her weight, clearly uncomfortable. I've been thinking about what you said. About working for what I want. About growing up. Her voice faltered. You were right, you know. I didn't want to admit it. I still don't, not really. But you were. I didn't jump in. Didn't rush to hug her or forgive everything. I just let her speak. I'm not asking for anything, she added quickly. I just wanted you to know I heard you. That's all. I nodded slowly. I appreciate that. And I meant it. She looked like she wanted to say more, but instead, she just gave a soft, sad smile and walked away. I watched her go, the cart bumping awkwardly against the sidewalk curb, her shoulders squared but heavy. It wasn't reconciliation, not even close, but it was something. A flicker, a start, and maybe that was enough for now. I didn't need her to fall at my feet. I didn't even need an apology anymore. I just needed her to finally understand that respect isn't a currency you inherit. It's one you earn. That night, I sat on my porch with a glass of iced tea and let the weight of everything settle around me. I thought about my wife, how proud she would have been that I stood firm. I thought about all the years I'd spent giving, hoping, and bending until I broke. And I thought about that house full of girls who now had a roof because I finally chose to draw a line. I had no regrets. Not one. Boundaries aren't about keeping people out. They're about keeping yourself in, whole, sane, and unburdened by the debts others try to assign you. I had loved my daughter with everything I had, but loving someone doesn't mean enabling them. It means being honest enough to say, this isn't love anymore. This is exploitation. And when the time came, I chose myself. Not out of spite, but out of survival. Sometimes, protecting your peace means letting go of the people you love most, especially when they mistake your generosity for weakness. Have you ever had to walk away from someone close to you to protect your boundaries? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's talk about love, limits, and the strength it takes to finally say, enough. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real-life tales about family, betrayal, and reclaiming your power. See you soon in the next story.